Alright guys, welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to show you how you can use the React Context API, and for that I have in here a simple tutorial to show you how it all works. So if we look in here into my browser, we have three different components. We have a component A. This component just has like an H1 saying component A. We got another component in here with the name of the component and then some names of the users. These will be the actual data that we want to share in between the components. And then finally, we have in here a component C. So we got all of these represented in here in our main component, the app.js. Now, what we want to do in here, at the moment, we have inside of this component B a state with some of these names, could be the users in there. And somehow we want to share this state, this data in here with the component A and C. Now, the problem that we have in here is that because this data, this state is actually inside of the component B, there is no way for them to communicate and pass the data, because with React, you can only pass data from a parent component to the children's. So in here, a possible solution would be go inside of the component B, get rid of all the state in there, and put the state in here on the top of the app.js. And then of course you can transfer it via the props to the component A and C. But this is not what we want to do. We want to use the React context, which will allow us to pass this data to any component that we want. So let's start with this. Let's go inside of our components folder that I got in here on the left side, and I'm going to create a file for our context. So let's do that. I'm going to do new file. I'm going to call this one, for example, users context.js. And it's going to be in here that we're going to create our context. Our context is just going to be like a way for us to, okay, I'm going to have this kind of state, this data, that I'm going to have it like centralized in here, and then I can just pass it wherever I want. So let's start with the first value that I want to put in here, which is going to be export const. I'm going to call this one, for example, users context. Okay. So this is our variable that we are creating. I'm putting an export in here because we will need to use this in other files. And now to create a context in React, we need to call this function called create context. Okay. So this is how we start creating a context, saying, look, we're going to create in this file in here a lot of different data that we can pass into different components after. Now this create context function, you need to import it on the top from React. So we're going to do import, and then we're going to say create context from React. Okay, so now we got this, we have this context. We could now, for example, go into our app.js. Let's go into the top, and I'm going to do in here import, create context from, and this is going to be / components and then the users context. Right. So now that we have this context has something that we can use that we call the provider. The provider will be something that we can wrap around any components that we want to pass some data in. So let's say that I want to pass some data to this component A. So I'm going to go in here, I'm going to use my create context that we have in here. I think this was not the name, I'm sorry, this is not create context. What we had was users context, that was the name. So it was a mistake of mine in there. So we got users context, and now I can use this user context in here, and I can call something called a dot provider. Okay, so I'm going to wrap all these around, for example, just this component A. This is where we could pass some data, let's say. So if we want to pass some data inside of this component A, I could just go inside of this user context dot provider and pass a property in here called value. So the value could be anything that you want to pass inside. Let's say that you want to pass a value that is going to be the name Telmo. Okay, so this is the value that we're going to pass. Now, if I want to go inside of my component A to grab this value that we are passing in here, okay, let's go inside the component A. Let's go on to the top, and in here, I'm just going to say, for example, const name equals to, and now I need to call a function from React called use context, meaning, okay, what's the context that we want to import in order to grab the value from it? Okay, I'm going to go in here and do use context. This function in here, this hook, we need to import it from the top, from React. And what's the context that we want to use? Okay, let's go into our app.js. The context, if you guys remember, is the user's context. This is the one that we are using. We want to use this context so we can grab the value that we have in there. So let's go back in here. I'm going to put in here the user's context. Okay, it auto imported on the top. So, okay, now I could just go inside of the component itself and just pass it in here as, for example, I'm going to put as an h2, and now inside I'm going to have the name. So I should expect on my component A to have the name Telmo. Okay, so as you guys can see, there it is. This is what we have, component A, Telmo. So if we try to do the same thing that we have in here, so I'm just going to basically copy whatever is in here, put it on my component C. Of course, I need to change this to C, React users contact, this is C down here, and this is C, okay? So it's the same code that we have from before, but as you can see, we don't have access to the name on the component C. This is because in our app.js, we only wrapped the component A with this provider. Okay, so if we would like to get access to this value, okay, let's go in here, pass this inside, and now the component C should have that value. Look, component C, Telmo, that's the value that we are passing in here. Now, you could be asking, what if I want to pass multiple values? For example, a name and an email, okay? In our value that we have in here, instead of just passing, for example, just this kind of string, I could pass an object saying, for example, name, and I'm going to put in here Telmo, and we could pass, for example, an email, which could be, for example, telmo@email.com, telmo@email.com. Okay, so we got this object. Oops, let me just go up here. We got this object with a name and an email. And now, inside of my component A and component C, we could grab those values. So where we are doing this use context, user context, we will grab that object that we pass, which has a name and an email. So we could simply just destructure the values that are coming from there, just like this. We got a name and an email, okay? So we can grab both of these values and then just present them on the page. So for this page in here on the component A, I only want to display the name from the user context, but for my component C, I want to display only the email. This is just so you guys can see that we can grab different values. Okay, so down here, I'm gonna put the email. By the way, because we are not using this name, we could just get rid of it, okay? You don't necessarily need to put it in there. So as you can see, in our component A, we have this Telmo, and on the component C, we have this telmo@email.com. Okay, but now, how could we apply this into our component B that we have in here, this data, and apply this into our provider? All right, so let's do that. In our component B, this is what I have in here. I have a state with the names that we have. We have a use effect that basically when the page loads for the first time, we will update the state up here with the names with this array, which is John, Mary, Tom, and so on. And then we are just doing a .map loop so we can create some LIs, and we are just displaying them on the page. Now, we want to make sure that this data will be accessible by our context so we can share with other components, of course. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I could simply just cut these two things out, the state on the top and the use effect. So I could just cut them off, go inside of my app.js, okay, go in here, and then of course pass the value in here with this user context provider, pass the value in there as, for example, this is going to be our, I'm going to put this as an object so we can just destructure it. This is going to be names, and then I'm going to put names, okay? So this is our key, and this is the value that is coming from up here. Okay, it's giving us some warning in here that we don't have the use effect, so we need to import it on the top. So I'm going to do exactly that. I'm going to do import and then use effect and the use state from React. Okay, so we need to import this one and this one. And now we are passing the value of names inside of the component A and C. We don't want just that, we want as well the component B. Actually, we just want for now for the component B. Okay, we will make sure that we can do this after for the component A and C, just to make it work for this one. Okay, so if we are passing this value with the names inside of our component B, let's go in there. Now, what we have to do, const, what did I call it? Names. I call it names. Okay, so my component B, I'm going to call these names and equals to use context. Okay, so I need to import the use context on the top. And what is the context that I want to use? Is going to be import users context from, and then I'm going to put in here from dot slash and then users context. So let's pass this value inside. Okay, so everything should be working fine. Okay, it's telling me that users context is not a default export. So of course, we need to wrap this around this. Let's refresh the page. Cannot destructure property email of objects. This is on the component C, of course. So for now, I'm just going to comment these from the component A and C because this is not working. We will fix this in a second. Okay, there it is. We got this one working in our component B. All right, so we moved everything in here onto the top. We passed the values inside and so on. Now, there's a problem in here, which is you might have a lot of different components. We have this example of, for example, a component A and C that, you know, at the moment we are having this state in here on the top that maybe is not related to the component A and C. So maybe it doesn't make too much sense to have all this data in here. So it would be better if we can just grab all this data that we want to share with different components and just put it inside of our user context file. So let's do exactly that. So I'm going to do export function users provider. This is any name that you want. Okay, this function, we are just going to create a function that will grab all that data and then we can just put it wherever we want. Okay, so export function users provider. Let's go in here and grab all this data because, like I said, there could be lots of different components in here where we don't want them to have this kind of data and then we have this state in here. It doesn't make sense. Let's put it inside of our users context in there. So we have const names use state. Okay, let's import the use state from the top. And let's also import the use effect. Okay. So we have this one, we have this one, and now the only thing that we need to do is we need to do a return and oops, let's just do a return like this. And what I want to return is going to be a user context dot provider, just like what we were doing before. But now the thing is, this function in here with the name of users provider, what I'm going to do is I'm going to import it inside of here of my app.js, just like this. So I'm going to do users. Did I call it users or user? I don't remember now. Users provider. This could be any name, like I said. This part in here on the bottom, no. This actually needs to be the name of your context and then dot provider. So this function users provider, this is what we want to do. Okay, let's go in here, users provider, and I'm going to do the same in here, users provider. And we will pass a value as well, which you will see in a second. No, actually, we don't pass any value in here. Let's just get rid of it. Now, this that we have inside, when we are wrapping this function around some other components and so on, this is what we call like the children inside of this function, okay? So we want to go into our users context and put in here on the middle, props.children, okay? So this will be considered as children. Whatever you wrap this function around will be considered as children. So we need to have our props in here on the top where we define this function. Okay, and now the last thing that we need to pass in here is what is going to be the value that you need to pass to these different components that you have. So I'm going to put in here value. I always like to pass it as an object because you could pass multiple different values, of course. So the value that I'm going to pass is names. So this is for the key. And then names, this is going to be the value of the state up here. Okay, and of course you can do just a short version. Whenever you have a key and a value that they have the same name, basically, you can just do a short version like this, and there it is. Okay, so now that we got all of these ready, if I go into my app.js, I need to import my users provider on the top, of course. So I'm going to do users provider, which is the function. Now, whatever I wrap around this users provider, so if I put in here, for example, my component A as well, okay, so I have the component A and the component B. Let's go inside of the component A. Inside of the component A, I can just go in here and do a const name. Remember, I'm destructuring this because it was an object. I'm going to do use context, the user's context, and then just display it inside. So you got name. What did I do in here? User's context. I call it names. Okay, so maybe I'm just going to call it name because this is going to be one name. Oh, sorry, it needs to be the same like what we have up here. Otherwise, it doesn't work, of course. So it needs to match. So we got this one in here. We go into our component, and this is not name, but is names. Okay, just to match whatever is coming. So look what we have in here on the top. We got John, Mary, and Tom. Okay, so we're grabbing all that data. If we try to do something similar to this, so I'm just going to copy this and go on to my component C. Copy this. Put this in here as the component C. Okay. And it's going to give you an error straight away because we can't destructure this value on the component C. Why? Because in our app.js, the component C is not wrapped with the user's provider, with that function. So it doesn't have access to that value. If we look into our user's context, just to remind you again, guys, we created our context. We then created a function called users provider. You can put inside your state, do anything with the state. This could be fetching the data from an API or something like that, and then updating the state. That's what we are doing in here. Finally, we are just returning the user's context provider. This is a way that you're going to use to actually wrap other components so you can pass the data in. Look, we are passing the value inside, which is going to be our state in here on the top. And we are just saying, okay, whatever goes in between our props.children will have access to whatever values you pass in here. And that's exactly what's happening in here. Alright guys, so I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. I was just like following a lot of other ones, they were not making too much sense, so I really hope that you enjoyed it. And if you enjoy, of course, leave me a thumbs up and leave a comment down if you like it or not. And that's it guys, I'll see you in the next video.